Gig Gab, episode 472 for Monday, March 10th, National Day of Awesomeness 2025. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians here in Durham, New Hampshire. I'm Dave Hamilton, and I wanted to remind you folks that one of our sponsors, Factor at factormeals.com, has a special promo going on for about the next month here. Actually, maybe just the next 2 weeks, now that I'm thinking about dates and linear time and all those things. Factor Podcast gets you a special deal, so make sure to check that out at factormeals.com. My guest co-hosts today are, well, do you remember when I went to NAMM and came back and said that there was one in-ear company that everybody was telling me to check out? Well, I have Kocen and Dave Friesma, two of the team behind Dark Matter Audio Labs. Tal has spent over 25 years as a front of house and monitor engineer for artists like Rosanne Cash, J.D. Souther, Ingrid Michaelson, Sarah Bareilles, Amos Lee, while also founding Deconi Audio and lots of other things in the in-ear world. Dave has been at the forefront of acoustic engineering for more than 2 decades, serving as tech director of Etymotic and Westone Audio, designing countless custom and universal IEMs, and all kinds of things, including founding Function FX to build guitar pedals for touring musicians. Well, touring guitar players anyway. Tal and Dave, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the industry is talking a lot about dark matter. And so I figured what better way to find out more. Everybody told me to find out more. So including folks on your roster, I had before anybody like in the in-ear industry told me to check you out. I had a couple of folks who've been on the show that are now going to be using your stuff for their summer tours. And they're like, can you find out and make sure that I didn't sign up for something that's not going to work well for me. And then suddenly everybody else was like, you got to go visit the guys at Dark Matter. Go see the booth. Go there. Go. Okay, fine. I got it. Yes, on my list already. So I want to talk about your individual experiences too. But give me one of you. I'll let you pick. That they insisted on coming together, folks, so we're going to see how this goes. But one of you, Tal, would you tell me about how Dark Matter kind of came to fruition here?
Sure. So, let's see. 2023. I had been running product development for Etymotic and Westone Audio, working for a company called Lucid Hearing.
Yep.
I left the company in August of that year for reasons that I won't say here, but I wasn't exactly happy with the position, so I left.
Sure.
I had an opportunity to go back to my original company, Deconi Audio, that I founded and had previously sold. So I took it and decided that corporate America wasn't for me.
I feel you.
Much prefer not being in corporate America. So I kind of went on my way. But I'll say this, I knew what was going to happen to those brands. And I didn't know because somebody told me, but I knew because I could see what was happening. Anyway, so it was December of 23 and I was in Japan actually. And I get this phone call from Dave and because we stayed in touch and he goes, "Hey man." I'm like, "Hey." He goes, "Guess what?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I just got laid off." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." It's like, "But congratulations, because we're starting a new IEM company." That was, it's something that Dave and I had previously sort of dreamed about someday, maybe starting our own thing. And, that sort of, I think that conversation is kind of where, at least for me, that's where it really started. I don't know about you, Dave, but at that moment I was like, this is going to happen. Um, and that's kind of where the idea was hatched. And from there, we spent months, almost daily on the phone talking through other brands, talking through what we think they're doing right, what we think they're not doing right, so we can avoid things to, just really trying to hone in on exactly what we want our company to be, and to give us the best, basis to start with, the foundation. And so, during that time, we came up with, the name, of course, which was a whole process in itself.
It always is.
Yeah.
I mean, naming a company is almost as bad as naming a band.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
So we went through that, we went through tons of, websites as well, looking at, what we liked, what we didn't like, worked with a brand, like a branding person who built, did logos and that kind of stuff. And
Sure.
just kind of went from there and built the business. We have two other partners, one of which owns a pretty major headphone company in the audiophile space, ZMF headphones. Shout out to Zach and ZMF. That's what Dave's wearing. And, so he's involved. We have another partner who's also the co-owner of Deconi Audio, Sam. And the four of us, started Dark Matter Audio Labs. And here we are. We officially launched in January at NAMM. We launched the website 2 days before NAMM, but we have already been building for our artists since September.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was clear at NAMM that so I mentioned, for anybody who hasn't been to NAMM, that this year the downstairs there was for all of the brand new companies that were just trying to, kind of getting their feet wet. You were not downstairs, and your presence did not make it seem like you should have been downstairs. You were where it felt like you belonged. I knew you were a new company simply because people had told me this, but it did not come across as, I didn't realize that you had actually launched days before that.
The website, I was in Hong Kong the previous weekend, right before NAMM, for a headphone show for Deconi.
Sure.
And I landed, and as I was leaving the airport, getting in my Uber, trying to manage my luggage, I'm talking to our web developer, and I'm like, okay, launch it. Let's put it up right now.
That's great.
We put it up, and then of course Thursday, the show started Thursday. And it's been off to the races since then. I mean, it was a great show. We've had a lot of great publicity. I like to think we've got all the competition running scared at this point.
Well, given that it was, I mean, competition in the music industry is interesting, right? In the music hardware industry is interesting because everybody realizes they're going to wind up working with each other at some point. So there's a level of what I like to call co-opetition that really is. I came from, I started a website 30 years ago called Mac Observer, and we wound up selling that off a few years back. But that whole Apple web, we called it the Mac web because the Mac was the only product Apple had at that point. But we all the websites that existed at the time, and even the new ones that came in, it was that same co-opetition, and that. So I recognized that vibe immediately when I got to NAMM, and everybody was like, "Oh, you got to talk to these guys." It's like, "Well, but you're ultimate ears." Yeah, but you should talk to them. Okay, but yeah, great, interesting, but it's friendly co-opetition to a degree. I'm sure. I mean,
there's room for multiple companies in the space.
Exactly.
And frankly, a lot of the folks in the space, we've met over the years. They're nice people. We like them. Like you said, we want to carve out our own space, and we want to do well. But there's a lot of cool people in the industry.
Yeah. So tell me, if you would, Dave, what is how do you define your niche? What are you doing that gives you your own little corner here?
So I'm gonna kind of backtrack just a little bit to answer that question.
Sure.
The people who have heard me talk about this, I don't want to sound repetitive and like a broken record, but a lot of people in the industry, they know Etymotic and they know Westone Audio. They're both
Sure.
legacy brands. They were both there at the beginning, really. There's always the debate.
Very
who's
much. I mean,
first.
Jerry Harvey famously tells the story that he, used Westone Labs to create to build all of his molds from day one.
I saw some early flyers that I was shown that said Ultimate Ears by Westone Audio.
Right.
Yeah,
Those
I
are
have that.
very
Oh,
old.
you do?
Yeah, I have a digital copy of that. But yeah,
He got rid of those pretty quick. But yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, and frankly, the guys from Westone were at Etymotic early on, because the Westone guys knew a ton about ear molds and they knew a ton about fitting, but the Etymotic folks, and I wasn't there at that time, knew a lot more about small tube acoustics, because that was really their area of expertise. Because before anybody was doing commercial, pro audio IEMs, Etymotic was making IEMs for auditory research.
Right.
So,
Right.
so it goes way back. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of the legacy folks around, and it was even a question when Lucid acquired Westone, was development wise, what's going to happen? Are new products going to be Etymotic? Are they going to be Westone? Or is it going to be some sort of hybrid that nobody likes? And this is always the challenge with legacy brands. And both of those brands have their own kind of, vibe and ethos. I come more from the Etymotic side, which was much more research based, and much more target curve influenced. But then I spent a few years on Westone Audio stuff, which is totally different. It's a much warmer sound. It's a different vibe. That the models, there's a lot more variation between models than Etymotic ever did. So the question was, what is dark matter? And the answer is really neither at the end of the day. We were always slightly boxed in by those brands.
Sure.
Not in a negative way. It's just they had their fans and they had their particular signature, and you couldn't deviate too far out of that. I would say dark matter is, it's kind of the handcuffs are off is what it is. And,
Okay.
And what it is it still starts with, a scientific, kind of basis. It still starts understanding what the resonance of the ear is, what the diffuse field curve is, what we're looking for that is fundamentally accurate. And then it's strategic deviation is what it is. And so it's not.
So those are boring. Those are boring terms, right? I mean,
look,
but like from an experiential standpoint, what do you want the customer, the end user, to experience with dark matter that's different from what they might get elsewhere?
So fundamentally, we believe we can deliver something that is a natural sound.
Okay.
That presents a kind of, it's hard to say a fundamentally correct when you're deviating from accurate, but there's certain realities in a live sound mix, that you want a little bit more low end, or in some cases you want a little bit less high end. So it's kind of, I would say, a more intelligently stylized response that people can work with for their purposes. And it's one of those things where you should be able to just plug them in, listen to music, and it'll sound great. But more than anything, for a pro audio person, this is a tool that you're using on stage.
Absolutely.
And it has to start from a sensible spot. Trying to EQ out of some crazy ass curve is really hard to deal with.
No, it's a disaster.
It's a disaster.
We talk about in-ears on the show a lot. And one of the most common sort of subjects of that is getting the right mix on stage the right way. And there's a lot that goes into that. certainly you can have terrible sounding ears and maybe fix it with EQ, and conversely, you can have great sounding ears and ruin it with the wrong mix or the wrong EQ. So, but it starting with ears that are going to give you what you need on stage is, in my opinion, the place to begin.
Yes, everything should start with a functional, good sound pre-EQ before you have to do anything. Now, there's variations between models because, you don't necessarily want everything to sound the same. Some people want a little bit less peak. You have the canal resonance at 2.7 kilohertz. Some people want a little bit less of that. Some people want a little bit more treble, a little bit less treble, particularly, depending on how it's going to be mixed. Some people want a little bit lower corner frequency on the bass, or they want it to roll up a little bit higher in frequency. Some people want it to roll up a little bit lower in frequency.
Yep.
There's preferences amongst good responses, I would say.
For sure.
So we want to have something that can appeal to everybody. And you want to say something, Tom?
Yeah, I want you to backtrack a little bit and explain.
I always do this every
a couple
time.
things.
No,
I want you to explain.
This is great.
To the
You're doing my
listeners,
job for me. I like this. Go ahead.
This is why, look, Dave and I are great partners because I, of course, come from the live sound side of things. I don't know anything about, small canal acoustics. I know it sounds good and I know what people like and what they want, but I can't make it. Dave's the one that can actually make it and he understands the stuff, but he also, I think, comes from a higher level of understanding. So I think,
and we
Dave,
are okay getting nerdy here,
Yeah.
but my next question was going to be to you, Tal. Like, okay, you've worked with people doing this, so yes, please keep going.
Well, hang on. I want Dave to explain corner frequency because I know that he talks about that because I think that's important because that's something that
I've never heard that term
a
before.
lot of other brands don't get. But I also want to hear, and I think your listeners want to hear about the I think the target curve, the canal resonance, and where that whole thing, like it's a quick story about the edemotic kind of accurate. So I think it's important. It's important to what we do because that is the basis that we sort of start with as far as that's our foundation so that we can give the musicians a better foundation. Right.
It's also fundamentally really important to how the human ear works. So, let's
All right,
start with the easy
let's get
one.
nerdy on that. Yeah,
So
let's go.
Let's start with the
It's
corner.
important.
The corner, basically, if there's a bass boost or a bass roll off or a treble boost or a treble roll off, it's basic filter theory. But basically, the corner is when you're starting from flat, it is the 3 dB up or down point. So if you have a bass boost and let's say it's flat from, 200 to 800 hertz or something like that. And then it starts rolling up into a little bit of a bass boost, which people generally want because people like a little, on stage, you get the tactile feel from being on stage, but typically people want a little bit more low end in there.
I think of it as the comfortable carpet that we all want to have underneath us. There is a comfort zone that happens with a little bit of extra low end.
So basically, as it rolls up, if you have a lower corner frequency, like let's say the bass boost starts at 200 hertz and it's kind of a slow slope and the corner frequency is 70 hertz. That's a very low corner frequency, I would say.
What is a corner frequency?
So that's the 3 dB point when you're up. So if it's flat
Got
at
it.
200 hertz, it's now 300 dB up at 70.
3
Now, we might
dB
have
up at 70.
So we might have another one that's 3 dB up at 150. So maybe it
Got
starts
it.
a little bit earlier. So the thing is that the higher the corner frequency, the more that bass boost is going to impede on the lower mid range, and the more it's going to get into kind of that muddy area that I know, a lot. Tal can answer this better than I can, just because as Tal intimated, I can design these things, but Tal's actually he's the one actually doing front of house. And I know, Tal, you always fight the 200-300 hertz area, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm mixing, it's generally it's for me, my enemies are like 125 to like 250.
Yep.
And that's something for me. I mean, a lot of that, it also depends if you're using wedges or if you're using ears, right? Because if you're using wedges, you're getting a lot of that blowback, and that's all at like 200 hertz coming off the back of those things.
Yeah. And this is important, folks. I mean, we have a lot of folks who, run their own bands, that listen and do their own sound, and being aware of that peak at 200 hertz that rolls off to 150 on one side and 250 on the other, and maybe scooping some of that out somewhere can make a difference in that muddiness in the room.
So if you're dealing with that a lot, you might want a lower corner frequency to kind of cut under that. And other people might not. They might want a little bit of reinforcement there. So it basically, that's what the corner is. It's just, it's the 3 dB up point on a boost or the 3 dB down point on a roll off. We're not rolling anything off because people definitely don't want that typically.
Sure.
Although in like a hearing aid, you might, because you want intelligibility as opposed to fidelity, but that's a different argument. But
sure.
So that's basically what a corner is. And so there's a little bit of, that's one of the design elements of any frequency response is where are we designing the bass boost? If we're putting a bass boost in, we will probably do some truly flat stuff at some point. I think there's value in it, particularly people that are mixing in a studio. Most people don't perceive flat as flat. Like if you design a flat earphone, most people say, hey, where's the bass? They're used to it.
Jerry Harvey sent me a set of his Layla reference monitors years ago, and he's like, oh, you're going to love these. I did not love them. They were very difficult to use. And I'm certain they were flat. Like I'm sure whatever he intended to set them to was what they were supposed to be at. But man, I never could get comfortable with those things. Not here in the studio, certainly not on stage. Yeah.
It depends on the person. Some people do like flat bass, but I mean, it's, there's different flavors out there. But it's interesting. And this brings us back to our other point is that, flat in the bass does not always mean flat throughout the spectrum. And I think most people, when they hear about a flat response, they just assume it's a straight line. And that isn't fundamentally true. So, if you've ever seen, and this goes back actually to the early pre-edemotic days, which of course, this is from the 70s. I was a toddler when this research was done. So, but Meade Killian, the founder of edemotic, did some studies about the response at the eardrum. And basically it was done with probe mics that were placed actually at the drum. So they were measuring in humans at the drum. And basically what you find is that, with a combination of your ear canal, which has a resonance, the pinna of your ear, even your shoulders affect it. But the whole human physiology, what it means is that if you put a flat signal into your ear in a diffuse environment, it needs to be non-directional. So if you're in a reverberant room, highly diffuse environment, and you put a flat signal into your ear, by the time it gets to your eardrum, on average, you have about a 15 and a half dB gain at 2.7 kilohertz, a huge rise at 2.7 kilohertz. And your brain perceives this as flat. So, yeah.
Oh, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of graphs on this. They call it the diffuse field curve. In fact, are you familiar with THX movie studios?
Yeah, sure, of course.
They did their own research. They came up with the exact same answer. So their X curve basically matches the edemotic target curve, which was derived from this research. So basically what it is, when you put an insert ear monitor in your ear, you're removing all of the biology. You're removing your pinna, you're removing your shoulder, you're removing everything, and you're shortening your ear canal, and you're changing the quarter wave resonance of your ear canal. So you're basically removing that 2.7 kilohertz peak.
But your eardrum would naturally
ear would naturally add to the signal, for lack of a better term. But
so if you put a flat signal through an earphone, your brain now thinks you have a 15 dB suck out at 2.7 kilohertz.
Right.
So the fundamental starting point is, and actually to backtrack again a little bit, edemotic did modify the diffuse field. We originally came out with an earphone called the Ear 4B, which it's considered a binaural earphone. Like if you listen to binaural recordings on it, it sounds really, really natural. But we found that people complained that it was too bright sounding if they listened to commercial recordings, because commercial recordings added treble, basically.
Sure.
In the mastering process, they added. So we did a study, we as in other people, because I still wasn't there yet at this point.
We as in the industry. Yeah.
We as in the company at Emotic did a study and found out that on average, it was X amount, and then basically modified the target curve to compensate for the brightness added. So that was our new target curve for consumer earphones, which was modified for, basically, commercially mastered recordings. And that people were generally happy about, other than it was flat bass, and some people didn't like flat bass.
Sure. Okay, so this is fascinating, and thank you, because I had no idea about any of this. But I'm guessing that everyone who's making in-ears is aware of all of this in today's world, or is that not the case?
It is now well known, and you have to give some credit to Sean Olive from Harman, because he did the Harman Curve.
Yep.
And the Harman Curve really fundamentally started with, a pretty similar curve to what we had, and it's a preference curve. The difference that I always kind of talk about with this, and I think the Harman Curves is actually quite a functional curve, and the research was good. But there's a difference in that the Emotic curve was always an accuracy-based curve on what is accurate. Even the modified version, we argued, was accurate because we were correcting for additional information that was added during mastering. Whereas the Sean Olive Harman target curve is a preference curve, and he's basically saying this is what people want.
What people want. It doesn't need to be accurate. It needs to sound subjectively good.
But he didn't really do much to the mid-range. He left the mid-range basically intact, so it's got that 2.7 kilohertz peak, and then he added a bass boost, which we've talked about that people want, and then he did a bit of a treble cut. Now, there's a lot of debates on that, because not everybody has the same preference, and I think even within the study, it wasn't like not everybody had a universal preference for it. But I think fundamentally, it's a good target that will appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So as you can see there, you have the.
I'll put a link. I'll put a link to what I'm showing on the screen if anybody's watching the video. But I've just got an interpretation of the Harman Curve up on the screen. So
and that right there is, you have a 2.7 kilohertz boost, and it's got a low corner frequency bass boost. A decent amplitude at very low frequencies. But I'm trying to read. It's kind of small on my screen.
Yeah. It's showing the Harman Curve and a headphone curve that sort of matches it ish, but
But it looks like the corner on that is somewhere in the, I might get this wrong, somewhere in the 125 range probably.
It is. That's about right. Yeah, so, maybe 100, but yep.
Yeah. So anyways, so that's why that's there. That's why you have that general, kind of ascension from 1 kilohertz up to 2.7. Now,
for anyone not watching, it's essentially a version of the disco smile. If you remember doing that on a graphic EQ, where you're scooping out mids and leaving the highs and the lows up to where they want to be. I know that that's not exactly accurate, but for folks listening, if you want a picture in your head, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, and definitely with the lower mid range, it looks like it's scooped out.
It looks like the lower mid range is scooped out, right?
But if you did a perceptive response, we used to have, we used to publish curves where you had the actual measured response, which looked kind of like the Harman except with a flatter bass. Then we had, what the listener perception would be, and it would be relatively flat. Because with that mid-range peak, your brain, again, interprets that as flat. Now, some people still don't want that. Some people still like mid-range down a little bit. There's very few people that I've run into that want more mid-range than that. There's probably some because,
Sure. Because we're all humans. Yeah.
Right. But some people like a little bit less. So, we have models that conform pretty closely to that curve. We have ones that have a little bit less. We put a peak in everything. But, a lot of the early IEMs didn't have a peak. And I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of them were flat. which really resulted in a very, very kind of pulled down mid range and a real strong smile EQ type performance. And so I don't know if people didn't know what it was or if people just didn't like that. It was.
I mean, it's probably the industry evolving and figuring out, what's the right way to do this. I mean, you gotta trial and error it, right?
Oh, of course, and there's always feedback from users.
Yeah.
Smart companies listen to their customer base and make sure they're giving them what they want.
All right, so we understand that there is a general preference that applies to most humans, no, certainly not all. And then there are some functional things that the human body has that in-ears mitigate to a certain degree. What at Dark Matter, and Tal, I do want to get into some of your real world experiences too, but and I think we'll have some fun with that too. But while we're being nerdy here, which models at Dark Matter, if I were to want to recommend something to the audience, like where should someone start? Where should a guitar player start? Where should a drummer or a bass player start? Like let's answer those questions.
So I think personal preference comes into it.
Always.
Let's give you a little bit of a basic rundown. So I would say, just kind of going through the line a little bit, we have the 2, which is the hybrid, which, that's for people that. Let's
talk about that too. This is a 2, I don't want to say 2 driver because they aren't the same. Is there a driver and an armature in the hybrid too? Is that right?
It's 2 drivers is fundamentally correct, but yeah, one is a moving coil or dynamic, depending on what terminology you use, and the other one is a BA. So basically, we have the bass handled by the moving coil, and we have the mids and highs handled by the BA.
And they're both fundamentally drivers.
They're both drivers.
Yeah.
I know, but as soon as you say driver, people equate that to dynamic driver, and we're taught that that's different from a balanced armature. The dynamic driver more resembles a speaker cone that we are used to seeing, and moves air in a way that's different from the way a balanced armature sort of rubs things together and makes noise.
And that's true. And some people like the sound of moving coils for bass. I think most people prefer BAs for, you'll see that within the industry, there's certainly moving coils that are used for everything. I mean, I've designed single driver moving coils that were well received.
Marty Garcia has made a career of it at Future Sonics.
He certainly has.
Yep.
But I think most people, on average, do tend to like balanced armatures for mids and highs. Some people feel, and this gets a little bit into the kind of audio nerd kind of touchy-feely vibe, but some people feel that like moving coils are a little bit more kind of organic sounding, it's a little bit different, maybe a little bit looser in some ways. Might slam a little bit differently. The 2H, the DM2H, has
this is the hybrid two driver one that we're talking about is the DM2H. That's the model name, folks.
It's definitely something for people that like bass, but we think we did it in a way where we didn't, wreck the mids and highs.
Sure, of course, yes, of course.
We've gotten good feedback on it from people that listened, but it does have a slightly higher corner than some of the other ones, and it's definitely an impactful sounding model for people that are looking for that, and a lot of people are. It's probably a great. I would say it's an all-arounder for a lot of people, but certainly, if you're a drummer, a bassist, or a percussionist, and you want to kind of hang out, not at the higher end of the line, it's a really good option. But I'd like to think we kept the mid-range clean enough that anybody can use it for what they need to.
I got to listen to your universal fit version of the DM2H at NAMM, and that is not the right place to listen to anything, because by the time you put something in your ears are already shot. But I did notice that I was trying to protect my hearing most of the time, but you can only succeed at that to a certain degree. I noticed that, yes, it had a very punchy low end, but the articulation up top was totally fine, and I wasn't getting any weird timing issues, which I have heard in when you've got a dynamic driver and a balanced armature replicating the same audio, or not replicating, but reproducing the same audio source. There sometimes can be weird timing things between the low end and the high end, and you guys have mitigated that as well. So like it all felt very natural, and I would agree. Like if this is the entry level of your product line, it's a great place to start. $699 US, $700 for this. Yeah.
I spent a lot of my life designing single driver earphones, so I get really annoyed when the cohesion is bad on a multi-driver. I'm so used to listening to crossoverless designs that I'm just picky about it, I think.
I think we all, what to listen for to be picky about it, and that's great. I think everyone is picky about it, even if they don't know what's wrong, they know something's wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's yeah.
Because I've had people say, using universal fits, I help a lot of musicians with their in-ears, and they're like, yeah, but something's weird, and I put it in, it's like, oh my gosh, like, do not use this. And for reference, folks, we've never recommended anything on the show that we've ever heard that in, because the last thing you need when you're trying to function on stage is your tool to be hindering you. And so there's a reason I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the fact that your time is in sync, and that's important.
I'm a guitar player. I don't want a guitar with bad tuning pegs, because I don't want to sit there fighting all the time. And it's the same way with IEMs. You don't want to fight your IEMs. They should be a tool for you, not against you.
I have a weird audio issue going on in my studio here, which I use both for podcasts and for recording band stuff, but also for rehearsals. And my weird audio issue is causing me to add more buffers to the setup in order to mitigate it. I'm still not sure what's going on, but we'll get to the bottom of it. It's how things work. I'm a tech nerd. We'll find it. But in the meantime, I had set my Logic setup from 128 to 256 buffers ahead of a rehearsal the other day to just to keep this weird crackling thing from happening. It sounds like a bit rate mismatch, or a sample rate mismatch rather, but I think there isn't one, but yet that's what it sounds like when it starts to happen. So I doubled the buffers. We started rehearsing. People I've played with many times, but we're doing a new project, and we're halfway through the first song, and I'm like, why can't our bass player, why is he dragging things? Like, what's going on here? This is super weird. And I hadn't put my ears in yet because I was trying to balance the room, because most people weren't using ears. So I was just trying to make sure we had a good sound in the room. In the middle of the second song, it's still happening. It's like, well, whatever. I put my ears in, and I hear a flam between when I hit my snare and when it appears in my ears. 6 milliseconds. That's what it was 6 milliseconds. I went and dropped the buffers, and it was like we all gained 20 years of experience in how to play our instruments together.
Right.
Like, it makes a difference. And I know that the difference between a driver and an armature is not going to be anywhere near 6 milliseconds, but it doesn't take much to throw you off. And like I said, these are people we've all played together before. We all know how to play, and we could not play. And it wasn't our fault. Well, it was my fault, but it wasn't the fault of my ability to play or anybody else's ability to play. It was just the sound was 6 milliseconds. That's all it took to throw things off. So this stuff matters. And the worst part is when you don't notice it. Like 6 milliseconds, we knew something was wrong. Didn't take long. But if, it's a millisecond and a half, 1 millisecond, I think we can all sort of suffer through. 2, probably too much. And things start to get to be really weird. But it's insidious because you don't know what it is. And that's why this stuff matters. That's why I just wanted to spend 4 minutes on this particular topic. But it matters. So the stuff needs to be well built. So, yeah.
Yeah, we do use, I'm sure like everybody else, we use crossovers too, and that helps, of course, separate. We don't have all the speakers going full range all the time, so
Sure.
that, and that's
Yeah, and
another
we
piece that helps.
and there's multiple methods to
Yeah.
crossover in an IEM, right? You can do it with electronic components, which we do, resistors, capacitors. You can do it acoustically through, you can do a low pass filter with a restriction built into the driver or built into the ear mold. You can do
Yeah.
it, with acoustic resistors. So it's, there's a bunch of different pieces, a bunch of different Legos we stack together to make the final sound signature what we want it to be.
All right, so the DM2H, that's the certainly the entry level of the Dark Matter Audio Labs line at $699. Somebody wants to move up from there, isn't as concerned about this lean towards the low end, wants something. What would the next thing be? I mean, I know we can go all the way to the top of the line, and that's fun to talk about, but I like to talk about the practical stuff here, and so
Yeah, I mean the 3 is basically a little bit more refined, I would say, than the 2H. It uses a dual bass driver. It uses a single mid high.
They're BAs. That's all BA.
It's
all
BA,
three. It's 3 balanced armatures.
It's
okay,
3 balanced armatures. It's a 2-way design still. It's clean.
Yep.
I would say it's a very solid all arounder that will fit just about anybody.
Okay.
It's one of those things where I would feel comfortable kind of blindly recommending that to just about anybody.
And that's the hard part about in-ears is you have to make your decision without hearing and certainly having on stage experience with these things. So it's worth spending some time figuring out really where you want to go with things, because everything is going to sound good. It's what are your preferences and what's your budget? These are $899. So, you're adding $200 to the budget there. And what would, you say that compared to the 2H's, it's a smoother response throughout. Is that what you'd said?
So I would say it's a little bit more controlled in the low end.
Okay.
I think it's overall a little bit more refined of a sound.
Because you got to be able to hear Tall's dog bark at exactly the right time. It's super important.
You will never hear Tall's dog bark with more fidelity than you will with a 3-driver Dark Matter audio.
My daughter just got home, so hopefully she'll come.
Oh, nice.
Let him out in a sec.
Great.
There he goes.
There and now he has left. Is the DMA3, if you were working with an artist, Tall, is the DMA3 what you would start with someone that did not communicate a specific preference towards something in particular?
I mean, I think it depends. It depends on what I know about the person. And it also depends on what they're playing. If somebody is, that is kind of the every, like if somebody's going to order online, we don't know who they are. They never listened to him. Like, sure, he's back. The 3-driver, is a good place to start, but, after that, most of the models, are a little more, I don't want to say geared towards other, specific musicians, but, more appropriate. Right.
Sure.
So I think like our 4-driver, the DMA4, which actually is what I'm wearing right now, is more for, the guitarist, the vocalist. It has a little bit higher of that peak that Dave was talking about earlier. So it's going to have a little more presence in that vocal range and in that kind of that meaty guitar range.
Yep. And
so that might be preferential to those people, keyboardists, that kind of stuff. If you're the next one up from that is our 6-driver, which is the DMA6.
Sure.
Of course, appropriately named. That's a more kind of an everyman model, but that's a lot more refined. And so it's
And now we're at $1,500, just so everybody knows,
Yeah.
to level
Yeah.
set. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So-
every man, every person that's got $1,500. So
yeah.
there you
So
go. Yep.
so when Dave made, Dave will design the models, and then I'll get a version I can listen to and take notes on. And on that model, my initial notes on the 6, I felt that it had a little too much in that vocal range.
Yeah.
But I also wanted a little less in that low mid range, just because, again, for a stage musician, that's a lot of that time. A lot of time that's preferred.
It
And
can
that-
be. I recently joined a hard rock band playing some like Rat, Skid Row, Van Halen, and our
Nice.
Journey, our singer, male singer, he can hit all those notes. And I noticed after the first couple of gigs, my ears were ringing. And this is not something I am used to. I am very aware. I've been using in-ears for 20 years. I'm like hyper vigilant about volumes and all of those things. I couldn't figure it out. And then finally I thought, well, wait a minute. There's two things that are happening with this band. One, we don't stop between songs. We just keep plowing through. That's how the sets work.
Mm-hmm.
And then two, vocals and guitar are sitting in that, that 2,500 hertz range all night long. It's never ending. And so I scooped that. I took about 3 dB out of there, and everything opened up, and my life was good. So not everybody wants that, but I want it with other bands, right? Like it's specific to that particular setup where it's like, nope, I need less of that.
Yeah.
And to
that
add
is
to
also
Paul's point,
it's what EQ is good for too.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes you need to.
Yes.
The 4 and the 6. I mean, that's basically one of the fundamental differences between them.
Yeah.
Is, the 6 is a little bit down in the mids and a little bit down in the highs compared to the 4.
Got it.
So at the show, the 4 and the 6 at NAMM, the 4 and the 6 were the two most popular models.
Yeah.
I would agree. That's what I liked. I liked the 6 the best when I listened to the line at NAMM, for sure.
A lot of people felt like it had just the right balance for them.
Yes.
And we're not talking about shaving 10 dB off here. It's it's just about dialing it in. And you can always bump up, you can always bump down, you can always modify it a little bit here and there.
I was surprised for something with 6 armatures that there were no weird resonant frequencies sitting in there, which is something I tend to lean towards a 3, maybe 4 armature in-ear for myself, because the more crossovers you add, the more chance there is for that weird resonant frequency to creep up. And I was surprised. You did a nice job with the 6s that like it wasn't there. I've heard others do it well too, but not everybody does it well. So
Well, they're both 3-way crossovers. There are some folks that are advertising 10-way crossovers and things like that, and I'm not quite sure why you'd want to do that. I mean, for me, I use as many crossover points as I have to. And I could certainly see doing like a 4-way with a super tweeter at some point or something like that. But, cutting it up more and more, you're just going to run into more phasing issues, more coherence issues. Like, it
gets weird.
I don't know. I don't want to ever paint myself in the corner by saying I'll never do this or never do that. Like maybe I'll find a way to do something and I'll say, oh, I was wrong.
Yeah.
this works great. But typically, look at how many crossover frequencies I can, crossover points I can add is not, the
Okay, so
bragging rights that I'm looking
this
for.
6 is 6 armatures, but only 3 crossovers. So they each 2 live in each range, as it were, ish.
And the 8 driver is still 3 crossovers. We're
Got
just
it.
using 4 bass drivers. So basically, it just gives you a mountain of headroom on the bass
Got
side.
it.
Because you can gain output and you can gain sensitivity, which Tall's going to make me explain.
No, we're gonna make Tall talk about something else in a minute.
Okay.
No,
Yeah, but basically, you can double up drivers to gain headroom, and to
That
gain
makes
output and things
perfect
like that.
sense now that you say it. I mean, we do that in other scenarios with speakers and things like that. And of course, you run into the same thing. You know, you don't want, if you put the speakers in the wrong spot, you end up with comb filtering, and that's bad. So, like,
You don't want that.
there's always trade-offs that you need to be careful of when you start adding things. It's not always just additive.
That's very true. The good news is we're not fighting them in a room
No.
same way.
Yeah.
that
If you're getting comb filtering in my ear, you've done something spectacular, quite frankly. All right, so Tal, you've spent a lot of time. I want to change gears here. Thank you for this tour through not just what you're doing, but I appreciate the digging into the nerdiness of what everybody's dealing with this, which means that we, as the end users of these products, are also dealing with it, because if the manufacturer does it one way that doesn't work for us or doesn't work for anybody, then that's bad. So it's good to have knowledge before we choose these not insignificant investments. So
and not to sound obnoxious about it, but when you asked what does dark matter bring to it, I mean,
this is it. I
got
got my answer.
A lot of knowledge and history, and an understanding of fundamentally what the starting point is.
Right.
And, you know, if you know the starting point, it helps, and you know what you want your endpoint to be, you know, that's really helpful. And
absolutely,
it guides you. So, you know, part of it is what Tal kind of talked about before, is that, you know, I have a technical background and Tal has the industry background. And between the two of us, you know, it's a great counterbalance of, you know, I can do this, and Tal will say, yeah, but you don't necessarily want
you don't need to,
you know, and he might say, you know, this is what I deal with on stage. And it's like, oh, well, I'm not a live.
Well, let's talk about that, Tal. I'm sure you have some great stories. And if one of them pops to mind, by all means, take us in that direction. Barring that, though, or perhaps to lead down that path, how do you approach getting the right in-ear mix for someone who doesn't know how to get it for themselves already? Because I know we're all different, but I know you've also dealt with people who are using in-ears for the first time. And my experience and our experience with the show is that guitar players tend to have a harder time adapting to in-ears than most other musicians. And of course, there's exceptions on any side of this. So maybe that informs my question. Go.
Oh man, you start with the tough questions.
Well, this is the tough question we all deal with. So
you know, it's. I mean, there is no right or wrong answer necessarily, but
no, I just want to know your answer.
I mean, my answer would be, if I was transitioning somebody from monitors to in-ears, would basically be to start by, you know, just getting them used to, you know, getting them to understand that they're not going to have that necessarily. They're not going to have that same kind of experience that they had before, right? When you have a wedge in front of you, of course, you know, you hear that energy coming off the audience a little more. As you know, when you have ears, a lot of people don't like them because all of a sudden, you know, you can only hear what's coming into them, you know, and a bunch of low mid bass that penetrates your
rumbles
skull.
around. Yes.
And so, you know, a lot of times, I mean, you know, I've only transitioned like 2 bands to in-ears in all the years I've been doing this, but, you know, I've worked with bands on ears and I've worked with bands on wedges, but as far as like transitioning people over, but you know, one way to do it is to start with, and a lot of people use these throughout their whole career, but audience mics, right?
Yep.
You put a mic on either side of the stage so that they can hear the room, right? Because, you know, a lot of musicians, you know, you go back to the early musicians, they didn't even have monitors, right? They were hearing the house, they were hearing everything come back, and you know, just a quick side note, but like with Rosanne Cash, we tour often with her husband, John Leventhal, who's a masterful producer and an amazing guitar player. And, you know, he can pick frequencies out. He'll be up there on stage. He's a wedge guy because he wants to hear the space, and he'll call out things, he'll be up there playing at sound check and he'll be like, can you pull, 210 out of the house,
Wow.
like he hears all that stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And,
I used to hear all that stuff before we got RTAs, real-time analyzers, and all our gear. I mean, we had to learn how to hear that stuff. If you got, 90 minutes between arrival and downbeat, man, you got to tune that room fast and set up your drums,
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. From when I started 25 years ago, things have changed so much.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah.
Line array speakers, of course, all of the, all of the system analyzers and just everything. So to kind of back to the story, I think it's, I think you start one step at a time, because I think if you just take somebody from a wedge mix straight to in-ears and you start feeding them, somebody in their wedge might be like, yeah, I just want, I want bass, kick drum, little bit of guitar, little bit of vocal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you put them on in-ears. Well, all of a sudden that's not enough, because then it's like, well, that's all I hear. I don't hear anything else. Yeah. And so then they want to start getting other stuff. And so that's when it can get tricky because especially if you're a band that's traveling and you don't have a monitor engineer, but you have an IEM system, that is a recipe for disaster.
It is. So let's tug on that thread because I think that's a common occurrence for a good chunk of our audience. They're using in-ears. They're not yet traveling with a split snake so that they can just mix their own and forget about the house system. So you're getting a feed from the house system. How do you start, even if with somebody that's used to ears, but you're starting, the first rehearsal of a tour or, a one-off gig, however it's going to be, what questions do you ask them to get them a mix that's going to work for them quickly?
The musicians, you mean?
The musicians,
like if they're coming through?
Yeah, if they're coming through, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, God, I haven't had like a house gig since like probably 2004.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this has changed.
Time.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But yeah, I mean, back then, of course, it was, I don't know if it's I don't imagine it's very different now, but it's, generally, most drummers, there's some specific things that they generally want, right? Guitar players, bass players. So I usually will dial in, something first and then ask like, hey, what do you want?
When you dial in that first thing, is it a kind of an even mix of everything with more me for each person, or are you treating things differently?
You talk about in-ears, right?
Yeah, for in-ears. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean generally, yeah. I think with in-ears you also use more effects, more compression, things like that to, you might put the drums in a subgroup and, compress them so that they don't get in the way of other things, right? Things like, you want to have that separation of instruments. And I think, it obviously that starts with a good mix, but it really starts with a good pair of in-ears.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where we come from as far as like the foundation you start with, because again, if you are traveling room to room to room and, you've got a different monitor board every night, different mics every night.
Yeah.
As long as you're starting with a good baseline, it's easier to then tell the monitor engineer, what you want and what you need, like even frequency wise, right? You could be like, wow, this sounds really muddy. Can you roll out, the 250 or 300 or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I got off track there, but
no, you didn't. You're doing fine. Okay. You're doing fine. Yeah. I'll reel you back in.
And
Go ahead, Dave.
5 seconds, even though I'm not the interviewer.
Oh no, we're all co-hosts here. You are just guest co-hosts. Everybody's equal.
So when you're setting in-ear mixes for folks, do you generally give everybody their own mix, or do you repeat mixes for various members of the band?
No, I'll make it. You make a discrete mix for everybody.
So every instrument gets their own tailored mix.
Yeah, for sure.
'Cause yeah. Okay.
Every musician gets their own mix. Now, look, if you're in like a bar and you've got, these days, I don't even know if this exists.
Now, these days, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
It rarely, when it happens, I did one gig last summer where, it was a town festival. It was a high paying gig, one of these, big sound system, everything. And they had this mixer that was probably older than I was. And it had 2 aux sends. And they're like, yeah, we can send you, an aux send that you can plug into your ears. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, what's the rest of the band going to use? Yeah. So thankfully we had brought a mixer with us, and but we didn't have a split snake. So we ran our mixer into their front of house and gave them an iPad and was like, you use this to mix us. Like, we're not using this ancient thing.
Yeah, right.
But it's rare.
Yeah.
These days there's enough aux outputs for everybody at least to get a mono mix. I try to get there early so I can be the one to negotiate a stereo mix for myself, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
I was just curious because I listened to somebody talk the other day. It was a monitor engineer that, repeated some mixes for some people, but not for other people. And it was this weird kind of, mix, lack of a better term, mixed approach where some people got the same feed and other people got tailored feeds.
I can't imagine sharing an in-ear feed with someone.
Yeah.
It's very different than sharing a wedge with someone, right? Mm-hmm. With a wedge, at least you're still all kind of hearing in the same bubble. But man, for in-ears, no way.
That could easily be a race to a louder mix of like, well, I need more bass. Well, I need more guitar. I need more bass now.
I think
guitar.
it might have been an a cappella band, but I'm trying to remember. I think it was a singing. It was a group of singers. I do remember that.
Yeah, interesting.
That's an incomplete story, but I was just curious
if
if there were ever exceptions or if you just always give everybody their own mix.
No, I mean everybody wants their own mix, and these days you can give everybody their own mix. Mm-hmm. Dave was saying, I mean, even your cheapest digital mixers these days have at least 6 auxes.
Yeah.
So generally that's not a problem unless you've got 12 musicians.
Right. Right. But usually a band that's got, 10, 12 musicians has solved this for themselves because they know otherwise it's going to be a disaster every time. Yeah. Right. So, but that, I think, even the least expensive seismic audio split snake, I think most bands that are playing, clubs where you're not controlling front of house, bringing your own mixer, bringing a split snake and mixing your own ears, but if you've already got the mixer, the $279 or whatever it is for a 16-channel split snake from Seismic is a cheap investment to make. And then it always sounds the same because you don't have to worry about that jerk's gains. It doesn't matter if the front of house guy doesn't know how to set gains, or even worse, is going to be adjusting gains mid-show, which if there's people on ears, the gain should be frozen and never touched. But
don't mess with gain structure. I mean, even
you say that, but I don't mean you would. But as the guy on stage, it's always a conversation I have. It's like we all know, right? We're all on the same page here. Oh yes, okay.
Yeah. We had I have a funny story about gain structure. When what was this? This must have been last summer. I was at Rosanne, and we were in some venue. I forget where, but they had. It was like 2 Yamaha consoles. It was like a Yamaha CL5 at front of house and maybe a CL5 or a QL5 at monitors.
Sure.
Anyway, so we get into sound check. I adjust all my gains and I'm, going. And as they're playing, of course, I'm over here adjusting my gains because, as they, it's very different than when they're going, brang, 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 brang. They're like, how's that? When they start playing, I'm like, okay, now I got to, I do my thing. And, all of a sudden, Roseanne's like, why is my vocal so loud? And then like Matt's turning it down and then I'm turning it back up. And then we realized, I was like, wait a minute. So I asked the house guy, I was like, how many, like, do you guys have like, what are we doing here for a split? And he was like, oh, I think only one of them's plugged in. And I'm like, dude, I was like, so we're sharing gains? You know, because all the head amps are all inside these Rios with the Yamaha.
Sure, so you don't see where it's going. Yeah. Right.
And we had no idea. Nobody told us, of course. And so it was like, oh, okay. So, you know, again, that was sort of that whole thing of like, you know, a little different situation, but like I'm over here adjusting gains and he's adjusting gains and we're both kind of going, what the hell's happening? You know, Rosanne and John are like, what? Like, why is my guitar so loud? And then, you know, where'd my guitar go?
And where did it go? Yeah. Exactly.
Luckily,
yeah.
it was sound check.
Right.
And then we solved the issue, and they had a second Rio. It just wasn't like, I don't know, wasn't configured. The right way. Yeah. I guess according to them, they had they usually do monitors from front of house, and so they didn't have the other thing.
It just didn't have it wired in. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, but that's the thing you deal with. You don't know. Yeah.
The world of Dante.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. That's yeah.
You don't see the stuff anymore, right? It's like back in the old analog days, you know, you knew because you saw a bunch of XLRs plugged in the back of your console. Now it's like a Cat 5 cable, you know.
Yeah.
So you don't know where anything is, you know. It's like, especially if you're in a performing arts center, there's, you know, this big huge room, everything's racked somewhere in the back, and you know, you expect that you have your own head amps, but you know, apparently it's not always true.
Yep. Do you have Rosanne on Dark Matter ears yet?
So she was on West Tone, and she was on West Tone before I actually worked there, and I've been with her for like almost 10 years now, if not over 10.
Yeah.
I actually started out doing monitors, and then switched over to doing front of house back in like 1920, early 2020, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And you know, with her, she only uses one, and you know, that's another good thing to talk about, right? And I think
it's a bad idea.
It's a trap. Right, because then
it's such a trap.
You know, because then once you do that, and like when musicians, and I should have said this earlier, right? Is when you're transitioning somebody to in-ears, you know, if they're like, well, I'll just use one, they're like, no.
You will never use the second one.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. She has other issues for it. She's got some in-ears stuff happening, and
got it.
You know, but she has more recently, the last, you know, probably 6 to 8 months, she has said, you know, maybe I want to try using both, you know, in-ears, and you know, because with her and John, she has one in-ear in, she's got a wedge in front of her, and then she has a wedge on her left. Now she has all different stuff. So like the one on her left is only John's stuff. If they're doing duo show.
Sure.
And so she'll have the wedge on her left, which is, you know, just John's guitar, to kind of like give her that stereo of his guitar that she's hearing on this side. You know, her vocal and guitars in the ear, and then just her vocal and guitar in the wedge, but trying to get those balanced.
What happens, I mean, I can speak to this as someone who attempted this early on and occasionally finds myself in a scenario where I have to do this if I can't get the right ears mix. But what will naturally happen, unless you are very vigilant, is that you will bring your ear mix up to the same decibel level that you are hearing with your other ear. Otherwise, it sounds too quiet in relation. And that, you know, if you're getting 95 dB on stage and then you got a speaker in your ear at 95 dB, this is a recipe for
hearing damage. And
that's even,
you know, 95
dB at the ear is even worse than 90 dB like coming off the speaker.
I know. Yeah.
Because if it's coming off the speaker, it should be less by the time it hits your drum. I mean, there's nothing more damaging about an ear, you know, an IEM, than there is about, you know, versus a wedge. It's level at the drum. But But one of the main advantages of IEMs is that you can listen at a lower level because of the built-in attenuation of the sealing, ear mold in your ear.
But it is a learned thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Your first day with in-ears, you will set them at 95 dB.
Yes.
Because it's what you're used to.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people will creep too. I mean, that's another problem, even when you're wearing both ears. I mean, if you, frankly, with Roseanne, have you ever talked to her about wearing like an earplug in the open ear? Because she could wear a high fidelity earplug and at least give herself some protection that would allow her to bring her one IEM down. It's
I will say their stage volume is not loud.
Sure, if it's just a duo.
Yeah, if it's a duo and you're not, that's probably.
But even with the band, the stage volumes is pretty tame. They're, the musicians she works with are like all like, A class musicians, and like,
sure, of course,
these guys know, they know kind of how it all works.
Yep. They know how to keep the gig.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, that's the reality of it, right?
Yeah,
like if it's, you're not playing Zeppelin tunes.
Yeah.
So, who's the most important person on stage? Not me.
Yeah. But to answer your question, she is transitioning over to dark matter. She actually came by the booth at NAMM. She was there to get an award. So she came by, we took her impressions, and
cool.
And so she is switching over, and hopefully we can get her on both ears. We'll see.
Yeah.
She's in the lab right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my guess to your question, Dave, because I've been with people where it's like, well, I want one. All right, try an earplug. If they're not a singer, that might work. But as a singer, suddenly when you put that earplug in, now you have head resonance that you're like short circuiting, and you're not hearing the articulation of your voice in that earplug because, of course, it's not a speaker. And so it gets really weird really fast for people. There might be somebody out there that likes it, but most people, it suddenly becomes this super detached world. So,
and that is something you fight against a little bit. It sounds like that's an occlusion problem. You can help mitigate that a little bit by either doing a deep sealing universal earplug, like a high fidelity, or doing a deeper sealing custom earplug that you mold for one ear. But mainly you got to get in a little bit deeper to get over the occlusion effect, because if it's a shallow seal, then you get that resonance in your ear, and nobody really wants that, particularly a singer. But there are ways to make hearing protection that work for singers.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I used earplugs for the first, 10 years of playing and singing behind the kit because I read an article with Alex Van Halen when I was a kid and he talked about how he lost 60% in one ear and 30 in the other. I was like, that ain't going to be me. So,
and a lot of people they want shorter canals because they think it will be more comfortable. And if you do it right, you can make longer ones comfortable too. But the main thing is that it is pretty disorienting if you have short canal earplugs.
Yes.
So,
yes. If you're trying to perform, if you're just watching music, it can be fine. But
if you're not speaking or singing, then
exactly,
the occlusion effect doesn't really matter because it's your voice resonating. That's the problem.
Yep. Well, we've learned a lot of interesting terms, including occlusion effect, but not just that. We have our corner frequencies and our canal resonance and all that fun stuff. So, thank you for this nerdy dive into why our in-ears work the way they do, or sometimes maybe don't work the way they don't work. Very informative. Thank you for taking all this time. Amazing. And thank you for sharing your stories too, Tal.
I'd like to add that, something that I think is very important, especially knowing both sides of this industry, is a lot of musicians and a lot of engineers even don't understand why things sound the way they do, how things work the way they do. And I think it's something that's important for them to understand, because they will get more out of it if they know how the whole thing works. They don't have to know how the sausage is made necessarily, but they got to know how to put the mustard on it. So, you know, and it goes, you know, and I think it goes. I lost my thought, but again, like I said earlier, it's like I have a 5-second buffer in my brain, and it's
better than a goldfish, man. You're doing fine. No, that's why I'm super appreciative of this education that you guys gave us today, because it really, like, there were several times, even the times I didn't interrupt you, when you were saying things and it was like, oh wait, that's why this happens. Okay, I get it. You know, and like the whole thing about number of drivers versus crossovers. That's the thing to be from my perspective. That's one of the things to be looking at is like, okay, but how many crossovers are they using? How many potential problem points have they created for me to have to deal with? Like those kinds of things are really valuable. So thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
We've said it before, but not today. It's not always about the number of drivers, right? It's, you know. Yeah. It's about how the implementation is done. And there might be a reason why I want to use more drivers for a particular design.
Sure.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, if it's a 6 driver, it's good. And if it's a 4 driver, it's bad. Or if it's a 10 driver or whatever.
I have a quick story that when I was at Westo, and I was talking to a very prominent monitor engineer in the business, and
they've probably been on the show, so there you go.
Yeah, we were talking about in-ears, and I said, what do you sort of like, what do you know about in-ears? What do what do you think? And he was like, oh, more drivers is better. And it was like, not really, and it just sort of that was the moment really in my brain where I was like, wow, like, I didn't know any of this stuff before I started getting into product development and this whole side of things. And I used to think the same thing. Like, yeah, it's got more drivers. It must be better.
More is better.
More, yeah. And in knowing what I know now, and it's like, well, this guy is like touring with one of the biggest musicians on the planet at the time. That's not a statement on his, knowledge or anything, but it's just like, it's the overall general knowledge that people in the business should have, but just have never had anybody to tell them, and so, I want to use this company as a vehicle to educate musicians and educate monitor engineers and front of house engineers and everybody on how the stuff works, right?
It's awesome.
Because if you know how it works, you're going to be able to utilize it better. And you may not spend $4,000 on an IEM that's got 57 drivers. You might really only want the one that's got 4,
There is the race in the industry to have what did we see at NAMM? Somebody's got 22 and 21 I think is the number. Yeah, Ultimate. I saw their designs of that. That is a chunky piece of hardware to cram into your ear.
Yeah.
21 is a challenge. I mean, look, sometimes even 6 or 8 is hard with some ears.
Looking at that 21, it was a glorious piece of Tetris, right? Of how they crammed all this stuff in there and routed it all around. It was a fascinating exercise, and I was happy to look at it and then put it back down.
And I'm not saying anything bad about it. I'm just saying 21 is a challenge for some years.
It's just, it was crazy. Yeah. No, I love the folks at Ultimate. I mean, they're great people and they really have some good hardware and yeah. But it was like when they showed me the 21, I'm like, okay, now you're just playing the game. And they're like, well, yeah, that's actually true. We are just playing the game with this one. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, but what you want to look at is, I'm like, yes, exactly. Right.
Next year it's 25.
Well, I don't know how Philip would do that, but anyway,
Since we're kind of getting to the end here, just to add on to Tall's point,
I
a
think
little
we're
bit
getting to the
about-
end. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? We could go for a couple more.
You guys
hours.
keep tugging on the thread. Yeah.
But early on, you asked what are we bringing that's different, right? And Tall, I think, addressed that at least partially. I mean, obviously, we've talked about some of the technical side. We've gotten nerdy, which is my favorite part because I like talking about stuff like that. And we do want to educate people. The main thing we want to be is we want to be approachable. People can talk to us about these things. Anybody can reach me at Dave at Dark Matter Audio Labs, Tall's at Tall at Dark Matter Audio Labs. We can have these conversations.
.com. There you go.
.com. Yeah. But
I won't put that in the show notes because I don't want to just put your email addresses out there for harvesters. But for people listening, there you go.
For people listening, the point is that, this is a business that thrives on trust and thrives on loyalty when you're talking about the pro audio space. And people don't know us yet, so that's going to come with time. But obviously, we've been in the industry for a long time. We're not, this isn't our first rodeo with it. But
right.
It's, what we're trying to accomplish is something that we feel is both technically solid, highly functional, highly usable, something that people will not only find as a good tool, but an enjoyable one, but also something that, people can actually feel like they're getting, attention, that they're getting customer service, that they're getting somebody that they can talk to, that they can reach out to, because I think sometimes in the grind of things can get impersonal.
For sure. Yeah, so, especially in today's world. Yeah.
So we're trying, that's one of our goals basically is, we're going to try to help explain things to you, and we're going to try to work with you. And, we feel that's the recipe. I guess time will tell if that's true.
We'll check back in a year and see where we are. But
see where we're at.
I mean, clearly you're eager to educate, and that is, I think, a recipe, part of the recipe for success. And I applaud you for that. So thank you.
I think it's about, for me anyway, it's about giving back, right? It's about, I've been in this business a long time, and, to have a brand, that's willing to take that time and not just be a website or not just be a face, but to really be interactive, I think is important. And like some of the other things we want to do with the brand is, get involved in other musicians' issues, right?
There you
Mental
go.
health, addiction causes, songwriters' rights with streaming, AI in songwriting, all these things that are important to musicians. I have an end goal of, being able to use this brand, kind of as a mouthpiece to help to spread words, to get involved with some organizations, ultimately maybe, once we get big enough to be able to donate, proceeds of sales into some of these organizations, but, all these things that are important to, the musicians and the bands, and it's only getting harder, for them out there financially and otherwise. And so if we can provide a tool, but also provide, kind of a safe haven of sorts to them to be able to come and get information on various topics and all kinds of different things, then that to me is success.
Well, I think that is a good place to kind of put a cap on this. Thank you for that. I think that's outstanding. I applaud you for that too. Thank you for hanging out.
Thank you.
It's great.
darkmatteraudiolabs.com. Anywhere else people should follow you as we
Instagram.
Yeah.
We're on the Instagrams. We're not on the TikToks just yet.
Okay.
But maybe we are. I don't know. Facebook, LinkedIn.
I'll make sure to link all of that stuff in the show notes at giggabpodcast.com. Yeah.
I don't know what else, Dave. Anything? I think that's kind of it.
That'll do it.
Is there anything else?
I think if there is, we'll have you back. I mean, that's
Sure.
this conversation doesn't need to be a finite one-time thing. And that's what I love about what we're all able to do here. So yeah, thank you for hanging out. There is one more thing. There are 3 words that we like to say here on Gig Gab. Tall, would you do the honors? Would you be so kind as to say those words?
Always be performing.
That's it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for hanging out, folks. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
And we're out.